and welcome to another episode of the Turn Up for What podcast, talking your Houston Texans straight from the Great British Isles. We're going out to Palo Alto this week to try and learn a little bit more about this year's recruit, and another one today, actually, very timely. And of course, your man who's got the opportunity under centre this week. But we're speaking to Ben from Stanford Rivals. Ben, how are you?
I'm doing good. How about yourself?
I'm good, man. I'm good. Thank you very much for the time. Much appreciated. Do you want to give the people just a not familiar, just a little overview of Stanford Football and where that program is right now?
Yeah, sure. So Stanford Football just finished we'll just say less than productive. I'd say productive, but 2021 was a rough year for them. You know, they went 3-7. Didn't have the kind of season that they were hoping to have. But you know, they had they signed a really good recruiting class, top 15, top 20 level recruiting class. Come 22. Really signed a quarterback in Tanner McKee, who's entering his junior year, and he's got some good weapons. So kind of a program that took a dip last year, didn't have the kind of year they were hoping to have, but they're hoping to have a bounce back 2022, and prove that last season was just an aberration and nothing indicative of who they are and who they're going to.
Sure. And where's the name, image, and likeness? You got the ever evolving transfer portal. How's that kind of impacted Stanford and sort of the Pac-12 as a whole?
Yeah, so for Stanford, it's kind of an interesting situation with them because for Stanford, at least, you know, the academics is such a huge part of their recruiting pitch and a part of their brand, right? So I think they've had a little bit of a tough time, you know, trying to figure out where to fit in the NIL, just because they want to make sure that doesn't overshadow the key part of their recruiting pitch, which is you come here, you're going to get an education from one of the top universities in the world. And it's, you know, not a 4-year decision, but a 40-year decision. That's what they tell kids. That stated, you know, players are able to make money off of jersey sales, off their own name, image, and likeness, off jersey sales. And there are some players who've you know, gotten some cool kind of NIL opportunities through Silicon Valley connections and everything. So it's definitely something that they're, you know, hoping to utilize. But it's just finding that balance between, okay, how do we make sure we can leverage this without it overshadowing our overall kind of message of you come here for the degree first and the NIL a second. As far as the Pac-12 as a whole is concerned, that piece of it, I mean, I think the Pac-12 as a whole, you know, has tried. Each school is, you know, doing different things and is trying to navigate it in their own ways. So I can't really touch too much on, you know, what other schools are doing too much. I mean, obviously, you know, some of this is an extension of what's already been going on before, right? It's like, you know, Nike has poured in tons of money into the Oregon Ducks, right, in their program. So yeah, that's a school that's going to even more kind of try to enhance things. So, you know, it really depends on the school. But as far as Stanford is concerned, it really is just a matter of finding that balance between, you know, prioritizing the academic side, making that the key part of their pitch, but also trying to enhance the fact they do live next to Silicon Valley and there are some cool NIL opportunities there. So hope that kind of answers your question on that.
Yeah, and the Texans this year drafted Thomas Booker as a recruit, and kind of him joining the program. What was his kind of perception joining the program versus kind of where he ended up at his time in Stanford?
Talking about what, you know, in terms of how did he progress from when he first got here to when he left? Is that your question?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when he came into Stanford, he was already a highly touted recruit coming in. One of the big changes he made, I think, was he put on some weight. Coming from his first 2 years at Stanford, he was about 20 pounds lighter than where he is now.
Okay.
And that was an interesting kind of transformation to see him make. You know, I think it's Stanford too. You know, they had some, I don't say challenges, but I think they recognize he's a unique talent and a unique player in that he's capable of playing both on the outside and on the inside. So he really kind of got a mix of both experiences, both playing outside defensive end, edge kind of rusher type, as well as interior linemen. Um, and he was more productive when he was, I think, playing more on the outside and wasn't as heavy. He didn't have as much production last season, and I think part of it was because they made him put on the weight and made him more interior lineman. So I think he's really most strong suited, ideally, for more of an edge rusher type of role.
Hmm.
If we can find that, it seemed where he kind of really shined. Um, but regardless, he was a team captain last year, um, and really a hardworking player. And you just interview Sam next to him. He's a physically impressive specimen of a player.
Hmm.
Really big, like I said, big guy. Does still, really quick feet. And I think more than anything, what separates Thomas Booker from other players is his intellect. He's one of the smartest athletes I've been around, and he understands the game really well, articulates himself really well, and knows what he's doing. And so, if there's a guy that can figure out how to transition and make adjustments to his game to fit the NFL, he would definitely be that guy, just because of how smart he is and how much he understands the game.
Yeah, it's interesting you say about the weight because I think when you watch his tape in his final year, I think you're right. I think there's some of the burst and some of the kind of pressures and some of the kind of disruption to plays that predominantly comes on the edge of a 4 or a 5 man front. But my concern with him was watching the Utah tape, and it wasn't a great game for any of that defense. By a long stretch. A lot of big, give touchdowns given up, and that was a problem for that defense last year in terms of number of games we watched. Long runs and and just blowing assignments. But if you watch that Utah game, there was a couple of touchdowns. There was one on the goal line. There was a couple of other plays where he just kind of got pinballed a bit in the run game, and I thought that was a concern for that. Is that something that's been always part of his game, or is that just kind of some bad tape? How would you kind of peg Booker's ability against the run?
Yeah, so it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about, I think, where his most kind of natural strong suit, I think, coming in is more of an outside edge guy. I think
Yeah.
interior wise was a bit tougher. I think the challenge for him really was simply, like I said, his strength, I think, was really being a burst off the edge, and really be more of an outside edge rusher. And so I think interior wise, he put on more weight to be more of an interior guy, but he lost some of his burst, some of his speed with that. One other thing I'll say too, to cut him some slack, to come to his defense a little bit here, is every team that went up against Stanford knew that he was kind of. I mean, if you look at Stanford's defensive line, he's the only guy that got drafted, and he's the only guy that was a serious like NFL prospect on last year's defensive line. Okay, so every team that went up against Stanford knew that, okay, if we're going to run well against Stanford, we just got to take Thomas Booker out and we're good. We'll be fine. And so he faced a lot of double teams, and teams really threw the book at the guy. I mean, that was really his biggest problem, was that teams knew that if they just slowed down Thomas Booker and took him out of the equation, they could run the ball well. And teams did that well. So at the NFL level, he'll be around and he'll be around NFL level guys. So he's no longer going to be the top defensive lineman on his team, at least not initially. And I think he'll benefit from that. So I think if he had a stronger defensive line around him and a stronger defensive front seven around him as a whole, I think he would have been more effective, and teams wouldn't have been able to scheme as much against him in the way that they did, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, you definitely see that on the tape. I think he does get a significant consideration of double teams, and and it's interesting about the weight, because I think when you look at him, like if you see him just kind of a head height, and even when he's playing, and on the broadcast, you wouldn't think he's 300 pounds. So I sort of toy with the idea: would he be better and more efficient, like you said, like in his previous years, around 280, and that may give you a bit more flexibility to kind of sit him on the edge predominantly, because I think a 300 pound guy at the pros just doesn't sit on the edge, So I think and what will be Lovie Smith's 4 man front. So no, that's interesting. To understand that dynamic of him. You kind of touched on it there, but who is Thomas the guy? I mean, what's good Texans fan expect him? He's very articulate, very intelligent, academically decorated. But how would you kind of describe Thomas the guy?
Thomas the guy is really, really likable. On top of just being smart, he's just a really likable, nice guy. And yeah, he's just a really fun personality to be around. He's very personable. I think one of the things that NFL teams and all professional sports teams factor into consideration is, community outreach. What kind of guy is this going to be? I think he's going to be a guy that's going to be great in the Houston community, and be a really good spokesman for the team, for team events, charity events, and stuff. Obviously, guys are drafted because of their football abilities first and foremost, of course. But I think they're going to get a guy that's going to be really engaged in the Houston community, and be a real asset to them in that way as well. And I just, being a good example to, kids in the Houston area obviously look up to the players on the Texans, right? And so a guy like, Thomas Booker comes in, Houston Texans player who's smart and articulate and educated like he is with a Stanford degree comes in. I mean, has an opportunity to just make a huge impact on the lives of kids and people in the community in that way, And so just from a community outreach standpoint, I think he's got a lot of potential there. And he's just, like I said, just a really nice, likable guy, and just a really easy guy to root for, a really easy guy to like. And so I think he's a guy that Texans fans are definitely going to like in that sense. Just a great all-around guy.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, what do you think his kind of ceiling is as a pro? I'm not necessarily big into player comps, but what do you kind of see his role being, or what certainly was the expected role that he would take at this level, and what sort of kind of career do you think he can achieve?
Yeah, so I think he's a guy. I mean, obviously, as a fifth round selection, right? I mean, it's tough to last more than 2 years in the league, right? The average
Yeah.
NFL career is 2 years, right? So 2 years, and so it's tough to stick. So he's already kind of got his back against the wall in that standpoint. In terms of like what his ceiling is, I think he's a guy that, if all goes well for him, he could potentially be a guy who finds his way to remain on a 53-man roster and get some rotational minutes, and come in and kind of be a second line backup defensive lineman potentially, and maybe in some situations come in and give guys a breather. I think that's kind of where he could be, as a guy that's kind of that second unit defense, get some minutes on field goal defense, and as a like I said, second string kind of guy. And it's a war of attrition out there in football, and so you can certainly come in and dispel some guys and come in and give guys a breather, and make an impact there, and like I said, benefit from not having teams have to double team all the time. So I think he's certainly, I mean, guys like him are able to, that are smart like he is, that are disciplined like he is, work hard like he is, and do have the physical package that he does have, are guys that can find a home in the league for a while. I don't know if I see him being a starter or being a Pro Bowl or anything like that. That's lofty, and that would be, I think, a surprise for all of us if he reaches that ceiling. But certainly a second string guy, get some minutes, solid backup, dispel some guys, and like I said, consistently find a way to hang on a 53-man roster. I think that's kind of his ceiling, and I think he'd be tickled pink if that's where he ends up.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, if you can get those kind of guys in the fifth round, absolutely. I'll throw a couple of names at you, Ben. One we've just picked up today, released by the 49ers, former Stanford wide receiver Connor Weddington. Not necessarily caught on in the league much. Any kind of impressions of Connor?
Yeah, honestly, I don't really have a whole lot to say on Connor because I didn't cover Stanford when he was, when he was here. I will say this though, that just in general, one thing that Stanford fans could expect from Texan fans could expect from Connor, is a guy who, is well prepared to play in an NFL kind of system, because the offensive system that Stanford does run, um, is very pro style oriented. And so he should fit in well with that. And obviously having Davis Mills, former Stanford guy, with him, there should be some connection there and some familiarity there. So, yeah, I mean, they're getting a guy who I think, is well prepared for the league in that standpoint, and has experience playing in a pro style offense, and gone up against good competition. So I think having some familiarity there with Davis Mills will be a good thing for him. So that's all I can say about it. I didn't really cover him when he was there, but just in general, I think coming through Stanford system should serve him well.
Yeah, no, and talking about the man of the hour, Davis Mills, in terms of kind of your recollections and memories of his collegiate career. How would you kind of sum up that from your standpoint?
Yeah, I think with Davis Mills, and once again, I wasn't covering him really when I took over this position a year ago, so he had already kind of left by the time I came on board. But just kind of conversations we've had on our side about him, one thing I'll say is I think in terms of his time at Stanford, I'm going to tell you, Stanford fans wish he had more time here, right? Because the one year he kind of started and kind of got the reins was the COVID year. Only played 6 games. And so during the limited opportunities he got to play here, he was fantastic. He was really, really good. And he's just another, I don't want to say call Stanford QBU. That's maybe a bit of a stretch, but they've had a lot of good quarterbacks come through here. And he's just another example of that, right? Another guy who's benefited from David Shaw's offensive pro style offense. And he was really good here. He really was. And I think Stanford fans, had nothing but fond memories of him. And they just wish that he had played in a normal season, not during the pandemic. And they could have gotten to see more of what he could do, because I think once again, he's another guy, and maybe Booker becomes a guy like this, where I think when he left Stanford, there was obviously more untapped potential still to be had. And I think when he became a starter the first time, I think everyone was kind of pleasantly surprised. And then to see him kind of take over the role he has in Houston and become kind of the solidified starter, I think it was a real pleasant surprise for people. So he's a guy that, has, to his credit, found a way to take his game up a notch from where it was at college. And I think it's a credit to Stanford's system and Stanford's coaching that they prepared him as well as they did. I'm going to credit to him for finding ways to dig deep and just get better, because some guys stagnate or some guys drop off. And he's clearly a guy who has improved from his time in college. And yeah, I mean, it's been kind of fun to see him accomplish what he has had in Houston.
Yeah, and I think that's right. I think it's the development trend. I think a lot of people are pinning their hopes on this year, coaching staff, fans alike. I think that if you watch his tape from last year, it's inconsistent. There's no full 4 quarters of good ball back to back, but what he does do is bounce back from a bad quarter, a bad half, or a bad performance in training camp, which is kind of infamously followed him around. I think that's that kind of bounce back ability that I think people like about him, and if he can continue to do that, then hopefully there's some form of serviceable starter in there. And in terms of Davis and everybody you speak to around campus and things, are they surprised that he's done what he's done coming at a 3rd round selection? Because it kind of felt like it was a blank canvas in many ways, because just the collegiate record was so limited, the sample size was so small, it felt like a number of outcomes was possible. Is there a surprise there, and is there kind of any expectations beyond the kind of surprise that's already been?
Yeah, I think people have been surprised. I think it's been a surprise. Like I said, I think people kind of seeing what he's done, like, man, wish we could have seen more of this guy. Wish we could have more of him. He's definitely been a surprise. But then once again, it kind of speaks to kind of the uncertainty surrounding a pandemic season, right? When you're only playing 6 games, you don't know what you're getting from guys, right? So yeah, I think Davis Mills has definitely been a real surprise. But I mean, I think at the same time, I think when he left for the pros, I think people kind of just knowing the pedigree of Stanford quarterbacks that have come through there before, Kellen Chris, Kevin Hogan, Andrew Luck, these guys, I think people kind of knew, like, okay, like, maybe he'll be the next line of those guys to kind of succeed in the league. So Stanford definitely has a strong track record of successful quarterbacks. So I think that gave people some hope. But yeah, I think everyone was definitely surprised that he's done as well as he has. Certainly to lock up a starter job as quick as he has. Yeah, I don't think anybody saw that coming. But 3rd round's not 6th round, it's not 7th round. There are guys who do at that level become starters pretty quickly, and he became one of those guys.
Yeah, and Kevin Hogan's a guy that we've added the familiarity with Pep's scheme. I think he is a kind of teacher camp role this year, but certainly Texans fans will have memories from playing against Cleveland, but he comes in as well to add to that lineage. In terms of this year, of the Texans kind of more involved in the draft with the Deshaun Watson trade, we've got a couple of extra picks in quite a few rounds. Is there any guys that you expect to declare for this year's draft, Ben, at Stanford, that people should be keeping an eye on?
For 2023's draft?
Yeah.
you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. The big name is Tanner McKee, who's the starting quarterback. He's a guy that, you know, some people have said could maybe go first round. I just did an article on this, and he certainly is a guy that if he has the kind of season that, you know, Stanford is hoping he'll have, he absolutely could be a first round selection. Just because he's 6'6", 226 pounds, quick release, good footwork in the pocket, and just a really smart player. And he has a cannon for an arm, and has no problem throwing in tight windows. So that's really the big name. I mean, there's other guys too that if they have big seasons could maybe find their way in on the draft board. Wide receiver Bryson Tremaine, who's coming off of a broken leg, was prolific last season before the injury. So if he has a big year, he could find his way onto a team potentially. Running back EJ Smith is going to be a junior. If he has a breakout season, I don't think he'll leave the NFL this year, but he's a guy that's got NFL potential. His dad's Emmitt Smith, so he's got NFL bloodlines for sure. That's always a guy you want to keep an eye on. Tight end Benjamin Jurasik, another guy. You know, and then corner on the defensive side of the ball, cornerback Kyu Blue Kelly is one of the top corners in the Pac-12. There was some speculation of him possibly leaving for the NFL draft for 2022, but he's decided to come back and sharpen his craft, hone his skills. And then some guys in the other defensive backs as well. Possibly safety Jonathan McGill, safety Patrick Fields, who grad transferred from Oklahoma and was Alma Bowl MVP. So there's some guys there in the secondary that, you know, can maybe get selected as well as some of the receivers. And then, you know, interior lineman Branson Braggs, another guy who could also get selected as well. So there's a few guys that they have. But I would say on the defensive side of the ball, top guy is Kyu Blue Kelly. He's the guy that could see his name called for sure. And then at the offensive side, definitely Tanner McKee. I mean, quarterbacks, you know, are hard to come by. Good quarterbacks are hard to come by. And I mean, I was at Cal before, and I was there kind of when, you know, Jared Goff was selected, and, you know, he's a guy that went picked, you know, number 1 overall, as you know. And even though Cal didn't have a great season, Cal was never very good under him. But that didn't stop the Rams from taking him 1 overall. And so even if Stanford doesn't have a great team season, McKee could be kind of a Jared Goff type, where in spite of maybe not having the kind of team success, that NFL teams just look at his overall physical package and say, okay, this is the guy we want to work with. And he can hear his name called first round. So, yeah, those are the names, and McKee being at the top.
Yeah, and in the Pac-12, is there 1 or 2 guys who you think are sort of like Thibodeau consensus kind of stars leading that division this year that people should be aware of, that you think Stanford will have a tough time against this year?
Yeah, I mean, as far as like players are concerned, I don't know. I mean, I'll speak more to just kind of teams in general here for this one. You know, looking at their schedule, one of the toughest games is going to be Utah. Utah is coming off a Rose Bowl appearance, right? And they got a lot of their key guys back. So going to Utah is going to be tough. You know, early in the season, they're going to have to face USC at home. USC is never an easy opponent. That's going to be tough. I think they go at Washington this year. They got Washington State coming in. Yeah, I'm just thinking of what last year's schedule was, and it's always flipped every year. Yeah. So, you know, Washington's going to be tough. Washington State's – I mean, the schedule that Stanford has is going to be tough, and they don't have a lot of cupcakes this year. And then they're going to have to go on the road in Berkeley for the big game against Cal, and Cal absolutely destroyed them, even though Cal wasn't that great of a team, just going 5-7. So they got their work cut out for them. They got a tough schedule. The one thing that does help them a little bit schedule-wise is they at least aren't playing an all-Power 5 schedule like last year. So last year's schedule, every team they faced was in a Power 5 major conference. They opened up with Kansas State. They then went to USC, and then they, you know, went to Vanderbilt. So, you know, Vanderbilt, not a great P5 team, but still a Power 5 program. This year they open up with Colgate, the toothpaste team, I call them. And you know, it's a non-Power 5 school, small school. That's one win they can kind of look at and say, okay, we're going to get that win. And that's something that should benefit them, is because it's nice to have 1 week outside of your bye week. you can kind of know, okay, we're going to get a win, and we can kind of rest some guys and get some other guys some playing time. So having that Colgate game at the beginning will be nice. But outside of that, Pac-12 is tough. A lot of tough teams. And then they're going to go to Notre Dame, and because Notre Dame came here last year, so they're going to go to Notre Dame. And then they close out the season with Brigham Young University, BYU coming in, who's always tough. So they got a tough schedule. And if they can find a way to go 6-6, they should be feeling good about that, because it's a tough one.
Yeah. Well, excellent. Well, thank you very much, Ben, for your time. I think all Texans fans should be keeping an eye on the program for the next couple of years, as there's certainly some close links there with Pep and some of the scouting staff, and they've definitely spent a lot of time on campus. But where can the good people find your work and the team at Stanford route?
Yeah, so the website is stanford.rivals.com. You can also go to cardinalsportsreport.com. That's the domain name of the site as well. So just cardinalsportsreport.com, stanford.rivals.com. Both of those go to the same place. So they can just check out the stuff there. And yeah, I mean, I'll hopefully we'll have some stuff on Thomas, stuff on Davis Mills maybe. And is one of our subscribers calls it, the Houston Texans are now Stanford East. So there's a lot of guys there. So it's been kind of fun to see all those Stanford guys somehow all come to Houston. So it's been, yeah.
Well, that was Ben from Stanford Rivals. Thank you very much to him and for his time. And we'll be back again next week to try and explore some more of this collegiate class with you. But until then, thank you again. We'll catch you next week.